As Israel targets its enemies across the region, is it creating a greater danger for all? Bombing Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and still pursuing Hamas in Gaza, Israel insists it is acting in self-defense across the Middle East. But with more civilians dying every day, is a more entrenched resistance forming that could threaten lives far beyond regional borders. I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Since Israel launched its war on Gaza, the overriding concern, or fear rather, has been whether it would engulf the wider region and cause instability around the world. Now, over the weekend, we witnessed a succinct regional escalation with Israeli forces bombing populated targets, killing the leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas in Lebanon, and displacing upwards of 1 million civilians. Israel then proceeded to bomb targets in Houthi-controlled Yemen, declaring it has no red lines when targeting enemies. So how much further will Israel go? And will there be dangerous, unintended consequences? Here's a look now at the last 48 hours in Lebanon and where the conflict stands.
Hassan Nasrallah led Hezbollah, the powerful Iranian-backed Shia militant group based in Lebanon, since 1992. He was killed in a massive attack on the group's underground headquarters in Beirut's southern suburbs on Friday. His killing indicates a significant shift in Israeli strategy, not only in its war on Gaza, but the region as a whole.
The elimination of Nasrallah is a necessary condition to achieve the objectives we have set, returning the residents of the north safely to their homes and changing the balance of power in the region that's lasted for years. So long as Nasrallah was alive, he would have quickly rebuilt the capabilities we took from Hezbollah. Therefore, I gave the directive, and Nasrallah is no longer with us.
For decades, Nasrallah built a rapport as a symbol of resistance against Israel. But a recent series of Israeli attacks, including exploding pagers and radios, as well as a series of assassinations of high-level Hezbollah commanders, has created serious doubts about the group's internal security.
Hezbollah is going to have to do a great deal of restructuring in the coming weeks and months, and its future, perhaps for the first time since its founding in 1982, is in doubt.
Israel has followed up on an assassination campaign targeting high-level Hezbollah, Hamas, and IRGC leaders across the region, as well as carrying out attacks on the port of Hodeidah in Houthi-controlled Yemen. The most likely candidate to now lead Hezbollah is Nasrallah's cousin and longtime member of Hezbollah, currently overseeing the group's political affairs and member of its top military council. The hardliner has already threatened to take revenge.
This aggression inevitably has its own punishment. It has its own retribution. This punishment will come, God willing. We will not talk much, as tomorrow the talk will be for the master of the resistance.
Israel says it wants to neutralize Hezbollah and allow hundreds of thousands of people to return to their homes in northern Israel. Even though some Israelis welcome the news of Nasrallah's death, they're also worried about the prospect of expanding military operations.
I have a good feeling because in the end Nasrallah was responsible for the death of a lot of soldiers and a lot of helpless people. But the feeling is confusing because we are afraid that we will reach a total escalation, even more than what we are used to now, when even now we no longer have a normal life. To go to the supermarket, we calculate when to go to the supermarket, for how long, or every small trip to a friend's house, we calculate the way there, where there is a shelter, and where there is no shelter.
Israeli military officials say they are preparing for a limited ground operation in southern Lebanon, while they don't want to conduct a large-scale invasion. Hezbollah is at its weakest in more than 4 decades, and many in the region believe the Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon is next.
So with a ground invasion in the cards and promises of retaliation from Iran, what really are the wider consequences of Israel's attacks on Lebanon? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Beirut, Executive Director of the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies, Makram Ouaiss. From Belfast, non-resident fellow at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy, Mikhael. And also from the Lebanese capital, former member of parliament for the Future Movement, Basem Shabb. Thanks all so much for being with me. Makram, I'll start with you, and let's begin with what's actually looming on the border and the amassing of Israeli tanks preparing for a ground invasion. How severe an escalation would that be? And how would Lebanon's army be able to respond, if at all?
It would, good afternoon. It would be definitely a significant escalation. The Israeli army has been targeting leaders from Hezbollah, Hamas, and other groups that have been part of that, if you'd like, resistance movement. Obviously, if the Lebanese army were to intervene, and we would like for that to happen in the sense that the Lebanese army should stand between, at the border and protect the country and take over that. But right now, the Lebanese army has limited means and needs necessary support. And the UNIFIL troops there also need to play a greater role in making sure that this area remains free of further combat.
Okay. Basem, would you agree there? And should and can the Lebanese army do anything in the face of this kind of aggression, especially given what the conditions have been in Lebanon? We've been hearing that army members haven't even been getting paid properly. A lot of them are disillusioned. The army is very much underfunded, undermanned, under-equipped. What would be the options for defense of Lebanon now?
I agree with Makram, but I'd like to add a few notes. One, the army is not a military power to be part of any war effort. The Lebanese army is part of a peace effort. So when there is an agreement, the Lebanese army is going to play an important role. When that comes, we don't know. And in the meantime, I worry that the army would be dragged into a conflict with Israel, for which it is poorly prepared and would suffer heavy losses. I worry that we are not looking at a negotiated solution anytime soon. The statement by Deputy Naim Asim did not show any diplomatic outlet to this conflict. The statement by Prime Minister Najib Mikhael, after meeting with the speaker, basically said, we will go with the Amos Hochstein proposal to accept 1701. But I have a feeling it's come too much, too little, too late for the Israelis to accept on the brink of a war, a land invasion in Lebanon. Okay. And add to that the distrust that Israelis have to the UN, which was very clear in the speech of Benjamin Netanyahu in the General Assembly. I fear that we are looking at a repeat of 1982, a prolonged conflict with occupation and helpless international community and the United Nations to do anything about it.
Yeah, those are dark memories indeed from 1982.
Yes.
And this is, I'll turn to Drew now, because that's what some are saying Israel really isn't considering. The long-term consequences of repeating what Israel did in 1982. I mean, do you think Israel is considering that it can be much easier to get in than to get out of an operation like a ground invasion right now, and then also not considering what the example has been historically and what could be created by an invasion?
Certainly the institutional memory within Israel should understand that 1982 to 2000 was a very desperate and unfortunate time, both for Lebanon, first and foremost, but also for the IDF and its loss of resources and soldiers in southern Lebanon. Frankly, the fact is that their occupation of southern Lebanon was one of the many reasons why the resistance, quote unquote, of Hezbollah was able to become as empowered politically as it was. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, considering the potential discourse coming out of Israel, that they have so far been interested in occupying something as far north. But considering the actions that they're taking, certainly in Yemen, certainly in Gaza, it's hard to rule out anything from this administration. And frankly, the lack of red lines, as you rightly pointed out in your opening monologue, is very, very concerning, because the red lines, this government has no red lines, and red lines need to be set by the international community. If they aren't set by the international community, and they so far have not been set by the international community, apart from a few mealy-mouthed and weak moments of condemnation or calls for restraint, then Israel might take that as a tacit invitation to do what it likes in Lebanon. And that is an incredibly worrying thought, considering that we've seen them bomb spaces of major citizen thoroughfare like the Kola roundabout, where many people go to take buses throughout the country. To what extent is Israel's ambitions militarily?
In
and
Lebanon
I don't think that this
and
question,
elsewhere.
in Lebanon and elsewhere. And I think particularly in Lebanon, what's most important is this is a sovereign state. That unilaterally invading the country is a war crime and should be rounded upon by the international community in a similar way that most of the international community rounded on Russia when it invaded Ukraine. But we haven't seen any kind of condemnation or any indication that condemnation to that degree will come.
Makram, I want to stick with Lebanon for the next few minutes before we look at the wider implications regionally and globally. So tell us, what really are the dynamics now inside Lebanon? Are some in Lebanon, because we brought back 1982, are some in Lebanon quietly supportive of Israel, as they also might want to see the elimination of Hezbollah? Are you dealing with those similar dynamics?
You know, I don't believe so. I think that the Lebanese population has come a long way since then, and including after 2006. Not to say necessarily that that means that the majority agrees with the decision of Hezbollah on October 8th when they joined that conflict. But to say that Lebanon is supportive of anything that Israel is doing, be it in Gaza or be it in Lebanon, is, I think, would be really completely, not real. In addition, I would say that, Lebanon's sovereignty is completely, has been challenged. We have currently, right now, as I speak to you, drones over Beirut for the past several days, weeks, so low that, we could hear them constantly. These have been at the border. Now they're everywhere. Today, many of our friends are receiving phone calls from different quarters, asking them to vacate blocks, to vacate their homes, to vacate because of potential nearby attacks. We've also seen indiscriminate killings of civilians. Over 1,000 people in the past week have lost their lives. My feeling is that although many Lebanese want the state to reassert its sovereignty and to reassert its control of war and peace decisions, there's no love lost with Israel, and everyone realizes that what Israel has undertaken since October 8th, let's say, in terms of how to deal with the Hamas, and later how it has responded to the Lebanese, to the Hezbollah joining that conflict, has been completely, if you would like, accusative of Israel committing war crimes and obviously, moving in a territory that's completely uncharted, with a prime minister that's currently indicted, who wants to show that he's been able to achieve something, and a cabinet that is really bent on pushing into Lebanon based on recent reports that we've heard over the last few days.
Okay. So, Basem, if you agree there, and it seems you do you think Israel's attack could actually make Hezbollah stronger, especially with younger leadership, ironically, now coming in, and via strengthening the resolve of both its fighters as well as those who sympathize with those fighters?
I think the base of Hezbollah is very solid. But I also think that a lot of the sentiment that we saw from the Lebanese in donating blood, opening their homes, is not directed solely at Hezbollah. It's directed at their Lebanese brethren. And I think Hezbollah should be flexible to make use of that. And I think we saw that when the Prime Minister said, after meeting with Speaker Berri, who speaks on behalf of Hezbollah, that Hezbollah is willing to consider a presidential candidate who is neutral and acceptable to everybody. I think Hezbollah will remain a political party in Lebanon, regardless of how militarily it is degraded. It will remain a strong political party. And in many ways, we have seen some rapprochement with other opposite parties, like the Lebanese forces, who fought Hezbollah in the civil war and now have shown a lot of sympathy and help towards the Shia population that has left the south. So I think there's a silver lining there, and I don't think it should be wasted.
Okay. Drew, I'd like to come back to you and then return to the other implications we were speaking about. Because as we said in the 1980s, you know, Israel eliminated the PLO and Palestinian groups that were operating out of Lebanon. It achieved its goal in that sense, you know, only to see Hezbollah step in and fill the resistance void. So do you think Israel is repeating history now, or could it end differently for Israel this time? Could it finally eliminate the enemy that it is set out to eliminate and bring a different power dynamic to the region?
In short, no. As Basem said, Hezbollah remains a very strong, well-rooted party amongst the Shia. That's not to say that all Shia are supportive of Hezbollah. That's not the case. But they remain the largest single party in Lebanon's parliament. This is not going to be uprooted overnight, and it's certainly not going to be uprooted with a shelling campaign that ends in mass innocent casualties of Lebanese life. It is a very pertinent comparison to look to the 1982 invitation, because Israel was invited in by Basem Shabb. At that point, it's often overreported, but certainly evidence that the Israeli army, the IDF, was welcomed by residents of southern Lebanon, wishing to get rid of the PLO because the PLO had brought Lebanese lives at risk by engaging in a cross-border war. But as Makram has pointed out, we do not see this kind of solidarity in the streets or in public opinion for the Israeli government or for the Israeli state, because we see at least by condemnation by the International Criminal Court and their prosecution of the war in Gaza, the war crimes and likely case to answer for genocide. This is not something that Lebanese, regardless of their sectarian background, their sect background, can countenance. This is something that there is a growing consensus around, that this is something that must be pushed back. So in one half of your question, which is, can they destroy their stated enemy? I really don't see how that's the case. How militarily, we've looked at recent conflicts in Iraq, in Afghanistan, where much more significant invasions and militaries have tried to get rid of certain paramilitary and militia groups and have failed. And Israel, having already repeated the same mistake in Lebanon, is likely to fail in this outcome.
Okay.
Now, what they might decide, sorry to cut you off, but what they might decide is that having gotten rid of their most militant leadership militarily, they might decide that this is enough. But there's certainly no case where they can uproot the entirety of the organization.
Okay. And then, Makram, if we look at the potential much wider implications, I'm talking beyond Lebanon and Israel's borders even, because we're seeing Israel take action now in Houthi-controlled Yemen. Some arguably say we saw in cases like Iraq with the invasion there, another even greater unforeseen enemy was created in the form of Daesh. Is it possible that Israeli action taken beyond Lebanon's borders even and beyond Gaza could create another Daesh-like enemy abroad?
You know, I guess I wouldn't say yes to that. My answer would probably be no. Because what we see today is really, if you'd like, a role for Iran through proxies and through groups in Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, who are getting necessary support from Iran and from Syria in the case of Hezbollah at different points in time. And these groups have a local agenda, but also benefit from the support that Iran is providing. And I think one has to look at Iran right now to see what Iran will decide in terms of its defensive posture. What we've seen in the change of leadership in Iran was perhaps a move towards greater openness to negotiate and to find some form of settlement with the United States. It's still not clear what form this will take, but it's definitely something that one has to pay close attention to. And ultimately, my guess is that it's that dynamic that will enable us to understand if new groups will develop and where they will be based, and based on what, balance of power is needed in the region if no peace deal is reached.
Right. So, Basem, what are your thoughts on that? Because if this escalation with Iran continues, it's still unknown what action Iran might or might not take. What do you see as potential blowback for Israel attacking Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen as well?
Well, the Lebanese, one thing that unifies the Lebanese is disappointment. The Christians are disappointed by the West, that it did not come to their help. The Sunnis are disappointed by the Arab world, which has not shown practically any effort to help out. And now we are seeing more resentment amongst the Shia community against Iran. Hezbollah is part of this axis of resistance. But in reality, most Lebanese feel that we are on our own. The Houthis have not helped out so far. Syria is declared its neutrality in a very subtle way. And what the Lebanese have seen in New York from this Iranian-American rapprochement and statements from Iranian officials that Hezbollah can fend for itself, that we need to open up to the United States, really left a sense of betrayal and resentment among some of the Shia. So we are part of the regional conflict, but in a way we are all left on our own. 2006, we saw outpouring of supplies and sympathy and demonstrations for Lebanon and Hezbollah, and now we see very little. Okay. So in theory, we are part of the axis of resistance, but practically we're on our own.
Okay, so Drew, if we look further at the reaction of the international community, particularly the U.S., do you think in the background the U.S. potentially is still thinking that it can change the landscape of the Middle East through Israel by tacitly supporting Israeli action, even though, as you said, it's never worked before?
I can't attest to whether that is correct or not. However, my instinct from looking at and observing the Biden administration's interactions with Netanyahu is that they're much closer knit than, for example, Obama's relationship with Netanyahu, which was notably frosty. Despite the fact that Barack Obama didn't really have as much will to intervene in establishing a two-state solution or even establishing the peace talks, bar assigning Senator George Mitchell as a peace envoy. The fact is that their fractured relationship between Netanyahu and Obama meant that the U.S. administration did not tacitly support Israeli actions. And it probably wouldn't have been possible that Israel would have gone to this level of engagement under an Obama regime. However, from everyone's the recollections of how the Biden administration works is that it is basically looking the other way in terms of Israeli actions. And I think that despite the fact that that this administration and the last couple of administrations have been very, very wary of engaging in direct action in the Middle East, considering the impact of the Iraq War and Afghanistan wars on the U.S. population at home, they might look to Israel as being a continued offshore balancer or foreign policy agent. However, I do think that we can see that there is a growing Arab American population that is continually and is probably raising their voice louder than other election cycles that may actually influence American administrations to sue for peace.
Okay, Drew Mikhael. That will unfortunately have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers because we are completely out of time. I'd like to thank sincerely all three of you for being with me, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey, and we'll see you next time.